Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Resilient Purpose Podcast. Today we're going to do an episode just me talking about topics that I think are important for people to think about and focus on for the betterment of our wellness and mental health. And so I think today's topic is a really important one because I think it's a foundational issue for most of us, or for all of us, for all humans, and it's the power of the relationship and power of connection. Something that we emphasize at our work, the work that we do, and especially the work that we're doing with kids is, what is the relational health in a person's life? And so we wanted to get into that. So before we get into the topic of relational health, I did want to just kind of talk about some of the previous episodes that we've recently just put out that I think are of also interest. So not only watch the one you're watching, but then when you're done, because you're going to love it so much, you go back and watch some of the other episodes. So the one we just put out was on Emdr. So for people that don't know, Emdr is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. That's a mouthful. That's why we call it Emdr. And our guest was Rebecca Case. She lives currently in Washington and is a licensed clinical social worker, independent social worker, and she's been a trainer for Emdr for a really long time. And it just was really awesome that we were able to have her on. We've been trying to get people at our agency trained in Emdr. Well, how long's the pandemic been going on? So like right before the pandemic, we were trying to arrange a time where she could come actually to our agency and train as many people as we could in Emdr, and then the pandemic hit and kind of threw our plans out of the water, blew it away. So then she started kind of doing them all virtually, so that was really cool. So I mean, even though the pandemic has screwed up a lot of things in our lives, there are things that have come out that have allowed for more accessibility, more opportunity, and so we've been able to periodically put people into Emdr training and go through the certification process, which is a really in-depth process. And so I really wanted to kind of highlight that because Emdr is a type of treatment that I think is really beneficial for people that are struggling with trauma, depression, anxiety, you name it. And I know like one of the big fears about therapy is to really kind of start talking about all the details of the bad things that have happened in our life. And Emdr is not quite that way. It's very structured. It is more about what we're experiencing in our body and how to reprocess those experiences in a more adaptive way that we can learn from our experiences. No matter how bad they are, we can learn from them, but then also grow stronger from them. So I really encourage you, if anybody's heard of Emdr and want to know more about it, if people are skeptical about Emdr, like they've heard things about Emdr and they're like, yeah, that sounds like it's kind of crazy, listen to it, learn about it. I think the best thing we can do when we're not sure about something is to get more information about it and to learn about it. And I can't think of a better expert than Rebecca Case about Emdr. So I think you'll really enjoy it. She's great. And so I really want to direct people to that episode. The other thing is the pandemic, obviously we already talked about it in reference to the Emdr. It's still happening. We're still struggling. There's a lot of things going on related to the pandemic. And so we put out an episode about things like mask wearing, vaccines, how we don't like to be told what to do. We don't like to be mandated, but talking about things related to the greater good of the community and coming together to support each other and help us get through this together rather than being divided. So I encourage people that are struggling with things related to the pandemic to watch that episode. Just kind of learn more about what are good things that we can do to take care of ourselves during this challenging time. And then the last thing I want to do before we go into relationships is pretty exciting. I can't remember how long ago we submitted for an award, an opportunity to put our podcast out there and get it evaluated by judges actually. So judges actually watched 3 of our episodes labeled Complexity with Recovery. So there were episodes where I was having conversations about addiction with Kukuka, one of our therapists. And so we sent those to a group called W3. So it's the W3 Awards. And Man, it was months ago that we put this in, and we were like, I don't know, we're just gonna like, we're ever gonna even hear back? Are they gonna like recognize that we actually had a podcast? We weren't really sure. We were just kind of just, hey, let's give it a shot. And so we found out yesterday, which obviously you're gonna be watching this not, in the future, so it wasn't really yesterday as you're watching this, but we found out that we got Best in Show for Best Podcast Series for those episodes. So that was really cool. So they gave out Best in Show, they gave out a Gold Award and a Silver Award. And so there's like over 3,000 people that submitted things around marketing, website design, podcast, and other different topics related to audiovisual and internet media and things like that. And so over 3,000. And so then they had gold and silver for each category, and then they had a Best in Show, which went to the top 1% of the applicants. So out of 3,000 plus people that submitted their stuff for award, the Academy of Interactive and Visual Arts Media had judges that rated our podcast or our submission on a 10-point scale. And by getting Best in Show, we had the highest percentage of scores across all the applicants. And so we were really excited and giddy and proud of kind of all the things, just this opportunity and to share. And so we'll be putting out more stuff related to that. We're just really excited. So I thank everybody that has supported our efforts to do the podcast. I think all the private messages we've received from people saying, hey, we really like that. I was pretty excited to hear, actually in regards to that complexity with recovery, I had a former friend therapist of mine that I worked with years ago actually get in touch with me and let me know that he used one of the complexity and recovery episodes with his group, that's therapy group. So that was really exciting and awesome. So I love hearing from you guys about that stuff and finding out more about how you guys use our episodes and information that we're putting out in the world. So thank you guys again for just everybody who watches it, everybody who supports it, all that. It keeps us going, and it really makes us happy to know that we can make some impact. So that's really cool. And, and ultimately what we're talking about just with podcasts and getting it out is kind of the impact of relationships. So if you think about, especially in a time of a pandemic, we're so disconnected a lot of times from each other. And the one way that we do connect, although it's not ideal, is through these methods, through watching podcasts, building relationships with people, our audience, people that communicate with us about what they learned or what they experienced by watching it. And so it's a really good thing to kind of be able to connect with people in that way. So today's episode, we're going to really talk about relationships. And I really wanted to, because I think one of the things when I was thinking about how to do this episode or what to talk about with this episode is that relationships are a slippery slope. They are our greatest gift. They are something that is essential for our survival. Like, we have to have relationships in our life to survive, but they are also our greatest threat. Pretty much in thinking about all 24 years that I've been in this field, could narrow down most of the mental health problems that I've worked with related to relational problems, related to relationships impacting people's mental health. So not only are relationships our greatest gift, they are also our greatest threat. And that makes things hard, because one of our recommendations a lot of time with people is connection in relationships. But what happens if the thing that we're asking you to do is also the source of your trauma? So I'm asking you to go out and connect with people and build relationships and start to trust people. But the act of trusting was also the reason maybe why you feel like you got traumatized by a relationship. And so I wanted to kind of talk specifically about kind of how do we take something and take advantage of the benefits of relationships and minimize or mitigate the negatives from it, and also how do we keep things in perspective in terms of relationships, because knowing that it's a big threat, but there's also a lot of benefit from it. So how do we balance that too? So one of the things that we recognize, or I recognize, is that when our relationships deteriorate, so does our mental health. I mean, think about it. If we're abused by a caregiver or abused by someone we care about, a spouse, a significant other, that's going to tell our brain that relationships are bad. It's going to make us gun shy to engage in relationship. Think about how many people out there had a really bad breakup and don't want to try to date again. I remember one of the biggest things that was happening. So I worked with kids most of my career until I came to Life and Purpose Behavioral Health. And so I worked with kids, and then I did therapy at Life and Purpose Behavioral Health, and I started seeing a lot of adults. And many of the adults that I saw, suffering from depression and anxiety, and all of it related to relationships. I don't want to go out of the house. I don't even want to leave my bedroom. There's no way I'm going to Walmart. I'm not gonna put myself at risk. There's just too many people out there that are a danger and a threat, and it's because of relationships in their past where they were hurt, where they were victimized, where they were traumatized by that experience or series of experiences. And so that's really scary because we know that the most devastating consequence for humans is the removal of relationships, is to disconnect you or ostracize you from your community. So not the death penalty, that's not the most devastating consequence. Taking somebody away from their community, isolating them, ostracizing them, rejecting them, is the greatest threat to our brain. People in prison, if they go into social isolation because of behavior problems in jail, and they're in solitary confinement for weeks, months at a time, their mental health starts to deteriorate. They even become psychotic, hallucinations, delusions. Their mental faculties start to go away and break down and fall apart. So we know that the removal of relationships or the loss of relationships are going to, number one, create a lot of mental health problems, but also kind of get in the way of us doing things that are good for our health, which is connecting with others. I've worked with many kids, and one of the kids that I've worked with, she had a really big support person in her life that supported her through some tough times, some really challenging times, and she lost that person. That person, passed away due to an illness, and that was we in the Emdr we call it a touchstone event. And in that event, she doesn't want to get close with people. She'll socialize and interact, but in terms of truly connecting with people, she doesn't want to do it. And her mental health is deteriorating, and she's having a lot of problems and really struggling, and that fear of connecting with people starts to kind of turn inward, where it's like, now that person's like, I'm no good, I don't deserve people. And so that fear of losing people is a barrier that we in therapy try to overcome with people that come in. So we get that it was an incredibly painful experience, and we know that you don't want to feel that pain again. But we also know that if we don't try to do something different, then the opportunity to feel good from a relationship isn't going to happen. And so you're left with just that pain. We don't want people to sit with their pain and just bathe in it and just suffer. There's a wonderful saying, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. I think a lot of people use that in terms of, well, people are controlling their own fate, or they're controlling their own kind of experience. But I also kind of take it a step further and saying, yeah, pain happens and we can't really avoid it, but we also can, suffering doesn't have to be where we stay. We can move forward and get through it and change the way we experience things. And so I think that's a really important message that I want to get to, is that try to take the pain of this relationship and, in terms of perspective, make it about that relationship and not all relationships. And that's what we're going to want to focus on. The other thing is I think we also, to kind of add to this, the fear of losing relationships also creates problems in relationships. So I kind of think about people that have a lot of resentments about people they're close with because they never really address anything. I think of, there's one of my daughters was talking about problems she was having with one of her friends in school. And we were talking about, okay, so like, are you gonna have a conversation with her? Do you want to talk to her about it? I don't know. No, I don't want to talk about it. And so then, she keep coming home from school and keep complaining about the relationship and keep talking about how things are frustrating her. And you're like, okay, do you want to talk about it? Well, no, I don't want to talk about it, because the fear is I don't want to upset her, right? I'm afraid that if I bring it up, she's gonna reject me, or she's gonna not want to be my friend anymore. And going back to fear of losing relationships, biggest consequence in our life, right? So it's such a powerful consequence that the idea of it takes control of us, right? The idea of losing somebody becomes really devastating for us, even though it hasn't happened yet, right? Like, okay, this is what I think is gonna happen if I confront this person, if I set a boundary, if I say, no, I'm not gonna do this, right? And so the fear of that person saying, well, I don't wanna be your friend, kind of leaves us devastated, and we don't even know if it's true. We think it might be true, but we have no idea, right? It's like the fear is predicting, not reality. And I think like one of the things we try to do in therapy is, well, how can we set this boundary with someone, or how can we address this issue or face conflict in a way where people are going to be more receptive to it, so you're not going to feel offended by it and want to leave, but actually grow stronger from it. So I think that is really something that I want you guys as the audience to kind of walk away with, is that what we're afraid of isn't necessarily reality. But then also, if that person leaves, what kind of meaning are we making from it? So if that person leaves, is the meaning that we make saying that we're bad people? Or is there a different way we can look at it that is maybe more grounded in reality? Like, maybe that person leaving, it says more about that person than it says about us. Maybe that person wasn't the best fit for us as people. I mean, have you ever met somebody in the world where you just don't jive very well with them? Like, you just don't interact, it's not comfortable, it's not an easy relationship. There's probably a reason. There's something about our biology and our experiences that don't mesh well, and that's okay. How many people are in the world? There's like 3 billion in the world or something like that. There's a lot of options for who are our best fit and who are the people that are going to do well for us. So kind of start talking about a lot of the consequences of not trying to connect with people and what happens when we kind of lose relationships. Let's talk about the positives. There's a ton of research in resilience. So resilience is our ability to, despite adversity, move forward, do well, to be successful despite adversity, to not fall apart when we're faced with challenges in our life, things that are really difficult for us. And the common thread among all the research on resilience is, you want to take a guess? Obviously you can't take a guess, but the common thread in terms of resilience is the one person in this person's life that cares deeply about them. So in all resilience research, the foundation to resilience is a relationship. So you think about it, if our greatest consequence to our brain is the removal of relationships, then it stands to reason that the most important thing for our success is relationships. It's that yin and yang. Like if losing relationships is so painful, then having relationships has to be pretty powerful. Because if relationships weren't important, then losing relationships wouldn't be a big deal. So yes, we don't want to lose relationships, but we also need them, and it's really powerful, and we see it in resilience research. How do people who deal with adversity and trauma, how do they get through it? How do people like Oprah Winfrey get through it? How do all the different people that we know that, you know, there's people in my career that have overcome adversity and gone on to become college professors and actually go into the field. Many people that go into the behavioral health field do so because they've experienced adversity in their life and they want to help. Think about people who struggle with addiction, who are in recovery, put themselves back into treatment and put them back into recovery to help others. So these are all really important aspects of it, that the solution to a lot of our mental health is connection. Think about what happens in addiction. I use drugs, I use alcohol, I do things that hurt others in order to feed my habit, and so then I start to ostracize myself from my connections. And you know what heals people? Connection. Think about the recovery community. Think about all the resources out there that help people in recovery. It's all about connection. It's AA. Yes, they're guided by 12 steps, but there's also the support, the relationships, the connection that each of the people in recovery utilized for their healing. And there's a reason why there's a sponsor in AA and NA, to have somebody that we can be connected to that can help us. Therapy is about the relationship. It's not about cognitive behavioral therapy. It's not even about EMDR. One of the first things we learn in EMDR is you have to have a strong relationship with the client. Well, the reason for that is that we're asking that client to do something that's really challenging. And so you don't want that person to feel like they're doing it alone or doing it with somebody that's not going to be able to support them. So the key to healing is relationships. So yes, for many that are maybe watching that really struggle, we're asking you to do something that's scary, but the reward is far greater than the risk. And that's going to be really important. There are things that we help people do in terms of those relationships. There's dosing and ways we can enter into rebuilding in relationships in a way that is going to be more accepting for your brain, for your danger systems in the brain, the alarm systems in the brain that go off. So the other thing I wanted to kind of emphasize with our brain and how our brain changes is there's a lot of research around neuroplasticity, and neuroplasticity is brain changing. So neuro is brain, plasticity is plastic, meaning changeable, so the brain changes. So our brain changes to our very last breath. And one of the main concepts about what helps us change this brain is the experience that we're having. Is there a relational component to it? So whatever intervention you're doing, if we have a relational context to it, it's going to change our brain more effectively. Kids learn better from teachers that have strong relationships with them. Doesn't mean that kids can't learn from teachers that are not very good or not very likable, but we learn more effectively from people we care about, from people we like, from people that we feel connected to. Can someone get something out of therapy with a therapist that's not very likable? Possibly, but it's really, really hard. So your ability to connect with the therapist plays a huge role in your ability to seek treatment or to be successful in treatment. It doesn't mean people being friends, it just means, do you feel connected? Do you feel safe? Do you feel trustworthy? What is it that person does that makes you feel that way? The other thing is, every relationship, and you think about it, with your parents, your kids, siblings, there's rupture. There's problems in the relationship, there's conflict. I mean, find me someone who has siblings that has never had rupture in those relationships. Find me a kid who's never had a rupture with their parents. Find me a parent who's never had a rupture with their kids. Happens. It's a part of relationships. It is actually impossible to go through life with somebody to not have some sort of rupture. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't we don't have things like, we might not fight, but that might mean because we don't really want to address any of the issues, and so we let those issues build up in our, in our minds, and we don't ever address anything. So we don't actually fight, but then we still have these ruptures, and we don't grow in our relationship. So we all have ruptures. It's all part of it. I have ruptures at work with my employees. They have ruptures with me. I have ruptures with my kids on a daily basis. I'm not a perfect parent, and my kids are definitely not perfect kids. That's okay, because the big thing about rupture is the repair. So the actual, a really powerful changing experience in life is the repair. And so you can't have repair without rupture. And so, and I don't mean rupture in terms of trauma like abuse and domestic violence and everything like that. I just mean conflict where there's an issue that we have with somebody else. Doesn't mean that the relationship can't get stronger. Actually, the only way our relationships really truly get stronger is when we have these ruptures, we repair them. We solve the problems. I think of when I worked in residential treatment with kids, teenagers who've been through a lot of trauma. They had a one strike and you're out rule. So most kids that I worked with, one strike and you're out. You do something I don't like one time, you're out. And I think that's like the quickest way to isolate yourself and remove yourself from society. And you have no opportunity to grow and get stronger. So those are really important. So don't look at conflict with your relationships as a problem, but look at them as an opportunity. That we have something to work through and get stronger from to make our relationship go stronger. And I would love to hear from people in the audience, that people that have those experiences of repair, and what impact did it have on their relationship, whether in significant other relationship or a relationship with their kids or whatever. But what is it like when you've had a rupture and you provided the repair and you did a repair? What was the impact on your relationship overall? Did you get closer? Did you guys have a stronger relationship? I would bet you did. I can't imagine somebody having a rupture and then repairing it and not being stronger for it. Because what you just demonstrated is you can solve problems. You can work through things. That problems are not something that you should be scared of. And that's really what we're trying to do. Same thing that happens with therapy. One of the main times where people drop out of therapy is when things get a little stressful. But you can't change in therapy without being stressed. You're not going to be able to resolve memories of traumas without addressing them in some safe way. There's safe ways to do that. So, as we learn to live life, we have to be willing to face the tough times, the challenges, the stressors. Now, that might mean that we, put supports in place to help you. We don't let you go at it alone. We do it together. We do it as a group. We do it as a team. We do it as a family. We do it as a support group, whatever kind of view you want it. We do it that way. No one has to do it alone. So I want you to focus on repair. When we go out there, repair. How can I address an issue with my child, with my husband or wife or whatever, so we can make our relationship stronger? And then the last thing I wanted to talk about relationships is, one of the struggles is that we put all our eggs in one basket. It's actually a fun saying that I like to kind of think about, is that if you spread out your resources, or you add resources to it, you put more tools in your toolbox, then you have better possibility of working through difficult times. There are friends that I have that are not really good at helping me with certain things. Like if I need help with like repairs in my house, there are certain friends of mine that I will not call. but there are people that I will call. So there are people in my life that are really good to help me with repairs. There are people in my life that are really good listeners. But then there are some people that just really want to give me solutions. And if I don't really want that as a support, then I don't go to that person when I just want to vent or I want to express myself and not need solutions. So one of the things about relationships is the bigger our therapeutic web we can create, the better resources we have, the more likely we'll be able to face challenges in our life and get through things more effectively. So I think relationships are important. And if there's one thing that is going to get us through COVID and life, it's relationships. It's supports. It's supporting each other. It is certainly not dividing each other and tearing each other down and blaming other people for life's woes, making fun of people, putting people down. Those are not going to help us get through. The best way that we're going to survive any of this is relational health and relational connection. So if you have a history of relationships that's not very positive, I'm asking you to do something that's going to be really scary. And that's when I usually encourage people to start with therapy. Number one, you have people that are trained to help and support and connect with people. And you have control over that. You can choose to attend it. If you don't like the therapist, you can not come back. So there's a little bit more safety there in terms of, you can't pick your family, you can't choose your family. Your family chooses you, right? So you need to these are sometimes also one of the best ways to kind of learn how to address issues within your own supports is to try it out on a therapist, is to go to counseling and practice how to address those things and set those boundaries and engage in those repairs. So it's a good, safe start. Because not doing anything, you're still going to be just there suffering. So, and that might be something that you're familiar with and you don't know any other way, but it doesn't have to be that way. And, there are solutions and, ways to not feel that way and to get familiar with happiness and joy and love and connection. So I hope that for everybody. And that's my soapbox on relationships. I hope that if at least one person watches this, reaches out and connects or does a repair, then life's good. So before I let you go, a couple things. Number one, remember that we have obviously Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. Like, subscribe, share. When we post episodes, share those episodes. Even if you don't necessarily find it interesting, other people that you know might find it interesting, might find it helpful. So please share and support us, and help our platform reach more people. Also with that is we want to keep meeting and interviewing more people. So if you have suggestions on guests or people that you know that would be good guests to talk about things related to mental health or wellness. It doesn't have to be about therapy specifically. It can be about just health and overall well-being. Anything related to that. We talked about sport and mental health. We've talked about community engagement. We've talked about faith and mental health. So there's a lot of different roads that we can go down that we think is appropriate for the Resilient Purpose podcast. Because really what we're talking about is resilience. Not necessarily mental health specifically, but resilience and building a more resilient community. So also topics for us to talk on, to give more information, to teach about, whatever. Those are options as well. So And then pretty exciting, I'll let you know when it goes out, but I was invited to be on Original Strength's podcast. It's called the Original Strength Podcast by Tim Anderson. So he wants to talk about movement and mental health, and we're really excited. Probably also going to talk about some Ted Lasso. So if anybody has some Ted Lasso interest, you'll want to watch that episode. I'm really excited to talk about Ted Lasso. So that'll be fun. So I'm very thankful to have been invited. Tim has been a guest on our podcast, and so I'm really excited to have the tables turned on this one. So he gets to ask me the questions. And so I'm excited. So, and we'll share all that stuff and let you know about that as well. So take care. Have a great week.